Hi everyone, this is John. Welcome to our weekly program, The Subcontinent. In this program, we raise important issues which unfold in this region which is divided into 7 states, countless traditions, languages and cultural identities, but united in spirit and a common history. Today, we are going to talk about 2 very important issues in India.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we will be reviewing how India has gone from inclusive to hostile as its over 200 million Muslim population suffers at the hands of Islamophobia. And we shall look into how coronavirus lockdown has affected the lives of millions of migrant workers in India.
The founding father of India, Mahatma Gandhi, envisioned a secular India inclusive for all. But Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founding father of Pakistan, claimed that the loyalty of Muslims in the post-independence India would always be questioned and that Muslims would not be safe there. Perhaps Jinnah was not wrong after all. The new India under the Hindu nationalist Modi government has turned a blind eye to all the mob lynchings, riots, destruction of properties and suffering that Muslims in India face today. Some say that the government is silent because it is complicit.
More and more recently, we are witnessing the swelling polarization between India's majority Hindu and the increasingly marginalized Muslims. This has called into question the very ideology of secularism and democratic equality of which India was built on. It has become difficult to ignore the growing Islamophobia and hate which is perpetuated both by the government and its supporters. This is one very good reason why focus should not be solely on particular incidents, but on the general condition of India.
It was 100 years ago that Mahatma Gandhi came to India and from South Africa and took leadership. And in the 30 years that he led our freedom struggle, the central idea was an inclusive country for all. It was 100 years ago that the Hindu Mahasabha and then the RSS, which is the ideological lodestar of the present government, was constituted, and they have battled for a different kind of India.
Recent months in India have shown a great amount of collective punishment of Muslims. It has become especially evident during the unprecedented coronavirus pandemic, where the infectious disease has affected all individuals equally and without prejudice. The government of India has denied its mistreatment of Muslims and it calls for unity among all. However, actions have been speaking louder than words and violent atrocities and abuses still continue within the country. The problem of Islamophobia is much larger than Indian communities. It's about institutionalized racial and economic oppression as much as it is about immigration laws and gender oppression.
In India, where members of radical extremist groups like the RSS, Bajrang Dal, Shiv Sena and Vishwa Hindu Prasad, allegedly supported by the BJP party of Prime Minister Modi, roam free to terrorize whoever they want. Some Muslims in fear are now changing their names, hiding their real identities in the fear of being persecuted. Innocent persecuted Muslims in the Indian administered Kashmir go through back-to-back lockdowns and still an ongoing media ban. And India has now effectively taken over any shroud of autonomy that the Muslims in Indian administered Kashmir had.
In a meeting of the Non-Alignment Movement NAM and Organization of Islamic Cooperation OIC, mistreatment of Muslims by India were highlighted by Pakistan. In his speech at NAM, President Arif Alvi drew global attention to targeting of Muslims in India.
The people of Kashmir in our region, who have been under occupation since 1947, have now been made to suffer under a political lockdown since August 2019, more than a year. The situation has become even more aggravated in the wake of the pandemic.
He also punctuated the lockdown in Kashmir, which prevented many from receiving medical treatment. Recent events such as the new status of Jammu and Kashmir, the Citizenship Act and new domicile laws for Jammu and Kashmir have increased Islamophobic activities inside India as well as in the Kashmir regions. Royal family members of UAE have expressed profound concerns. Kuwait has taken serious notice. The OIC is also of the same mind, and human rights activists are all speaking up about Islamophobia in India. But it's not just Muslim countries that are sharing concerns. US Commission on International Religious Freedom has also placed India among its greatest concerns in its annual report. The hope has been that in bringing these actions to the international stage, some international pressure will be put on India. India has been a country with a positive international image, which has now been tainted with anti-Muslimism tendencies.
For more analysis on Islamophobia in India, we are now joined by Mr. Fawaz Shaheen, who is a researcher at the Quill Foundation. Mr. Fawaz, welcome to the program. So, do you think that Prime Minister Modi is sincere in his wishes to call on global solidarity and unity during this pandemic, when the situation in his own country is so bad?
We certainly hope there is sincerity in calls for global solidarity, and of course this is a pandemic that requires global solidarity to overcome. It has been disappointing, however, to see the way the blame for the pandemic, or the occasion of this pandemic, has been used for dog whistle politics, for scapegoating minorities, especially at the moment when the government did not have too many answers in the beginning. They brought out this whole concocted this whole narrative of Tablighi Jamaat, which is a Muslim religious revivalist organization, as being carriers of coronavirus, and that just, so officially the government did not say much, but on social media and on news sites, it just spread, the rumor spread like anything, that coronavirus in India was being spread by these Muslim religious preachers or religious groups, and that just solidified into a narrative in the very early days of the pandemic.
So how have the public reactions been to all of this?
There has been the positive in this is that ever since this happened, so now of course it's been 2 months from that, people have a better understanding of what this pandemic is, how and why it spread. The silver lining here has been the way people have responded to these fake media narratives, and how there is now a pushback against rumor mongering and this kind of fake news spreading by the mainstream media, and the dog whistle politics, the scapegoating of minorities. And we are seeing in multiple places people are either calling them up, including people taking legal action against media houses, but also more generally the pushback from people generally against these kind of scapegoating media narratives. That has been a silver lining, and yeah, we hope that that leads to some change in how the media looks at these issues in the future.
There have been reports by professors and others in the workforce that they have been pressured to quit their jobs, or weaker candidates with ideologies more aligned to the current government have been hired. How deeply entrenched is Islamophobia in institutions?
Yeah. See, this is a slightly deeper question, because certainly the current government is not just a political party, it is the offshoot of an ideological movement, and as the political offshoot of an ideological movement, it has sought to entrench people of its ideological background in various state institutions, particularly in academic and research institutions. So that has certainly happened. But Islamophobia in Indian institutions and in Indian academia, it actually predates this government, although things have worsened under them, certainly, especially with the incidents of direct violence now even filtering on to premier educational institutes. So that is something which has been there for a long time, and which is now getting exacerbated with this, because of the general atmosphere and because of how of the incitements to violence that are generally present nowadays. We are seeing the entrenched institutional Islamophobia actually spill over into outbursts of direct violence against students. So that is a worrying downward trend which we have seen in the last 5-6 years.
All right, Mr. Fawaz, let's see how media views this situation, and then we can continue with the question and answer session.
Rosina Nasir has been facing harassment, mistreatment and discrimination at the hands of JNU Vice-Chancellor Mamedala Jagadish Kumar and the chairperson of CSS EIP Yagati Chinna Rayo because of her minority Muslim identity. Virtually overnight, Muslims became the sole culprits responsible for the spread of the coronavirus in India. Pakistan urged the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) and the international community to act against growing Islamophobia in India and help stop attacks on Muslims in the country. OIC condemns the recent and alarming violence against Muslims in India, resulting in the death and injury of innocent people and the arson and vandalism of mosques and Muslim-owned properties.
Thank you, Mr. Shaheen, for staying with us, and welcome back to the audience as well. So, Mr. Shaheen, many say that Indian treatment of the minorities, especially the big Muslim minority, has kind of tarnished the country's public international image. What do you think about this?
For more than 70 years, India has had a decent an image as an exceptional democracy which stands out amongst its immediate neighbors as an example of a functioning democracy with a relatively tolerant and inclusive system, especially when compared to our immediate neighborhood. But over the last 6-7 years, that image has definitely taken a beating, and it is not just an image problem, it is an actual problem, and the government needs to realize that unless it takes concrete steps to address the problems of violence against minorities and the growing prejudice and scapegoating of minorities in the popular culture and popular media, unless it takes concrete steps to at least punish those who are inciting people towards violence against minorities or those who are openly engaging in violence against minorities, unless there is a definite demonstrable action by the government to punish and curb these activities, this image problem will not go away because the underlying problem will not go away. So that is something that the Indian government as well as the ruling party needs to realize. This is not something which can be smoothed over with a PR process. It will need actual concrete action because the problem has gotten so bad that the world can no longer choose to ignore it.
So in your opinion, will the international pressure be effective to encourage India to take up measures to reduce mistreatment of Muslims?
See, I don't think that international pressure is the appropriate forum for any kind of domestic issues to be addressed. Whatever change has to come from within. It has to come with following a dialogue between people in India, between citizens in India. And external pressure cannot. I don't think it is capable of forcing the hand of countries generally and specifically of a country like India.
Mr. Shaheen, thank you so much for your views. It was nice having you here with us. Viewers, let's now see how people on social media platforms have reacted to this prevalent Islamophobia in India, and then we can continue with this show.
For a person who stays in India, the azan sound disturbs his sleep, but when the same person resides in UAE, it becomes melancholic. That's how they target our rights. 15 to 20 men in an upscale Jaipur restaurant saw my long beard and almost lynched me. Had gathered around me wanting to find proof of my being a Hindu like a janu, which I don't wear. They think I am Muslim or Kashmiri. There is no fear to lynch Muslims. If the boy who openly fired a gun near Delhi's Jamia Millia Islamia University could be treated as a minor and presented to the Juvenile Justice Board, why not those boys accused in the Azamgarh case be given the same treatment?
The coronavirus has created a wave of problems for India. India is becoming the epicenter of the coronavirus infection in Asia. And the healthcare system of India is so poor that more people die due to poor quality healthcare rather than the lack of access to it. Then there's another problem. At least 90% of the Indian workforce is employed in the informal sector. And after PM Modi imposed a lockdown, millions of daily wage earners lost their jobs. Most of these were migrant workers who decided to go back to their villages after the lockdown. And this came with problems of its own.
In April 2020, the Indian government imposed a nationwide lockdown. The Indian people were told to stay home, and those who defied these orders would face law enforcement. With the sudden lockdown, tens of millions of migrant workers were forced to stay indoors, stranded in large cities. Many of them lived in small spaces, often sharing a space with over 10 other people. Without an income to buy food and fear of the virus, they struggled to survive in these conditions. So they began a long exodus back to their homes. Some walked thousands of kilometers. Migrant workers were among the worst hit during the COVID-19 pandemic. Scores have died in their dangerous voyages home.
We ended up creating a humanitarian crisis. And it was not until the Congress party actually made a lot of hullabaloo about it that the government got its act together, when the images of people dying on the roads of thirsty and hunger and devastation began to make the national headlines. When 16 people came down under a train, when they were just trying to get a night's sleep before they would trudge on lonely highways under the scorching sun, trying to get to their homes almost 250 or 300 miles away. It's a tragic commentary on the way the government handled it. Much belatedly, almost weeks later, the government did introduce trains, which again created another controversy because they wanted the migrants to pay for it. And these were people who had been without jobs, food, housing, income, everything. So it was, frankly speaking, callous, extremely insensitive, and exceedingly badly planned.
There are about 40 million migrant workers estimated by the World Bank (WB) in India. The economic contribution of migrant workers was estimated to hover at 10% of India's GDP in 2010. About 50 to 60,000 moved from cities to rural areas over the course of a few days during the lockdown. According to a report by the WB, India's containment measures might have contributed to the spread of COVID-19.
Coronavirus in India has gained much attention from the regional and international media as well. So let's see how they have covered this situation in this context.
The contractor refused to clear their dues and prevented them from leaving home. The workers set off on foot for Jharkhand, only to be beaten by the contractor and forced to return to their settlements in Nimrana's Moladia village. The government initially asked the millions of stranded migrant workers to pay their own train fares home, but now some states are refusing to give consent for trains ferrying them home. The government did not give us anything, and the food we got was from charities. Even to get that, we faced discrimination, with locals getting first preference. The government's response has been inadequate and largely focused on long-term economic uplift, leaving the poor cast adrift with no access to social protections.
India is facing all of these problems despite having locked itself down after coronavirus spread was still low. But critics say that it is precisely because of the way lockdown was imposed that the situation has come to this point. Modi administration announced a lockdown without giving anything but a few days to people in 75 districts of India, without any proper measures to control the outflow of people who would panic and go back to their villages. Some say that the situation has become catastrophic, but the worst is yet to come.
The magnitude of India's internal migration is about 2.5 times that of international migration. Owing to the lack of proper statistics and monitoring in India regarding the true numbers of migrant workers, India was very ill prepared to handle this issue. The Supreme Court and the Government of India came under fire for not acting fast enough and failing to show urgency towards the plight of stranded migrant workers.
The very fact that India's highest court, the Supreme Court, had to intervene is itself a manifestation of the political immorality of the current government. What is the job of any government in any country? It is to look after those who need state support, who need government welfare, who need as much as an institutional system can deliver for them, whether it's food, security, transport, travel, health. And here you had the counsel for the government of the Supreme Court making a ridiculous charge that all these statements made by the opposition parties led by the Congress, which actually talked about the reality at the ground level, which is that the migrants are requiring urgent attention, and any delay by the government will only cause them further miseries. It will make the conditions even more abject. I do believe that the government statements in the Supreme Court via their counsel reflected the mindset of the government, really. And it ultimately woke up the Supreme Court, which it did send out messages and fiats and directives later to say that the government's responsibility is to ensure that no one suffers, that within a time-bound program they are transported to their homes, that they are given food and shelter, etc., etc. And I think one of the incidents that really probably broke the conscience of this country and made us all wake up to the reality of what the poor were going through was that in these special trains which were being utilized to transport people to different parts of the country, there were almost 80 people who died while they were in the middle of their journey. And how absolutely repugnant is that there was no attempt to provide them shelter in the train, which means food, which means medicines, which means water. I mean, how can people die in a train unless they had no access to basic facilities?
Going off of the Stranded Workers Action Network survey, about 78% of migrant workers haven't received any salary for the lockdown period. 82% have not been given any ration from the government. And 64% have less than $1 left to live on. Several human rights activists, lawyers and social workers have expressed concerns for India's large population of migrant workers and their conditions. The migrant workers are a symptom of the country's immense class inequalities and political standstill. Although the gears are beginning to turn and the plights of the migrant workers are becoming more and more recognized, the situation is still dire. The process of addressing these issues is taking much longer than expected.
People have also shown diverse opinions on social media platforms regarding this particular issue. So let's see how they have seen this situation, and then we will end the show.
The question is, how can an Indian be a migrant in India? India has a long history of people moving to different cities and villages for work. In recent times, people from various socio-economic groups and sectors keep on moving to better parts of India. Several migrant workers lost lives because of flawed lockdown. How did the government of India respond? The government of India's response is defame, blame and attack Congress and its leaders at a very personal level for asking the right questions. The Modi government intends to create a portal for registering migrant workers across India to track their movements interstate. This is literally a quasi-NRC by registering the most underprivileged part of the population.
With this, we mark the end of this episode. Your comments and feedback on our social media platforms are helping us improve. These episodes are made possible with the hard work of our team, who consistently work to make sure that you enjoy the show. So please don't stop suggesting different ideas about what to discuss in our show and how to improve it overall. See you same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.